Ahoy and welcome, this is Admiral. The Last Chieftains has been out for a few months now, but I haven't yet had time to comment much on it, until today. This will be a pretty informal, shoot-from-the-hip rating of the DLC and its accompanying free update, based on what I think it did well and where there's room for improvement. I will not be talking about the campaigns and would recommend Ornlu's videos for those interested. I will touch on balance, but lightly, as everyone else has been talking about that for 3 months, and will mainly be considering the offerings of this DLC from a thematic, historical, aesthetic, and overall design perspective. First, a quick word on civilization choice. As mentioned before, the Chieftain civilization's main advantages are that they provide at least token coverage of areas distant and diverse from the Inca, and are relatively well documented at least in the era of European contact. Their main disadvantage is that they generally correspond to the less advanced and organized cultures among the choices that were available for South America. So it's okay to notice that this DLC lowers the bar of technological realism for civilizations, much as the Aztecs, Maya, and Huns did in the Conquerors, and even does so significantly relative to those older civilizations. Even I, as a huge fan of American civilizations, have very mixed feelings about that. I can accept some new level of bonkerism for the sake of representing notable native cultures in AoE2, but I think the historical inspiration of the civs ought to be extremely rigorous in order to not veer into absurdity, and to compensate for the great many accommodations you already have to make for those civilizations. I also think this DLC needed at least one advanced Central Andean civilization, in addition to the existing Inca, to balance things out and give a more well-rounded representation of South America. All of the Last Chieftains campaigns take place within the last 100 years of the game's time frame, and involve conflicts with Europeans. So it's less about medieval South America on its own terms, and more about South America in terms of interactions with Europeans in the early modern period. Nothing wrong with that per se, but in terms of its focus it does feel closer to an AoE3 than an AoE2 DLC, and leaves so much on the table in terms of classic civilizations and empires, especially the Chimu, Wari, and Tiwanaku, that were powerful during the core medieval time frame. So the civilization choices are a mixed bag. In some ways this DLC is a return to form relative to Three Kingdoms by returning to the AoE2 time frame and to regionally important people groups, and in other ways it's a radical exercise in pushing the boundaries of technology and organization for civilizations. Next we'll consider the most overwhelmingly positive aspect of the DLC updates, namely the new graphics and especially the South American architecture set. This is something that I and other fans have been asking for years and years, and after over 5 years, we finally got the first new base game architecture set since the release of Definitive Edition. In a perfect AoE2 world, I would want a distinct tribal set for the Chieftain civilizations, and especially Tupi, and a central Andean set for the Inca and other Andean civs I'd like to see. But the existing set is about as good as it could reasonably be for architecture that's supposed to cover and take inspiration from all 4 civilizations. For those who care about aesthetics, this is a huge value add to the game, by contrast to most other base game DLCs with minimal new graphics. The investment put into this DLC and update is significantly greater than the Mountain Royals, for example, where they checked the boxes of adding tolerable new civilizations and campaigns, but didn't rise beyond a very low baseline of effort for assets. Notwithstanding my upcoming critiques of this DLC, the new architecture is genuinely impressive and appreciated, and without it, the Last Chieftains would be in a much rougher situation. The new female monk skin is a highlight as well, as priestesses were fairly common among the Inca, who take the lead in setting the continental flavor for this DLC, and among the Mapuche. While I didn't explicitly predict or ask for priestesses, I did anticipate this visually by using the Chronicles priestess to represent South American monks in a background scene long before we had any images from the DLC. I also did correctly guess the civilization icon of the Muiscas in the very first part of my top 6 video. The new flora and fauna are also very good, and while not everything I had hoped for in those categories, do manage to cover a lot of ground, and I particularly like the way that snakes were implemented. One minor critique here is I do agree that the pineapple plants should pop out a little more visually to look less like standard bushes, and there were still some missed opportunities in the graphics department. This DLC would have been an amazing opportunity to add emerald, salt, or silver mines, as I've said for years. We now have foxes and whales as gold sources, but strangely none of the valuable minerals that so commonly were used as stand-ins or supplements for actual gold. There's also a conspicuous lack of South American cultural artifacts, despite items of that sort appearing in other recent Chronicles and base game DLCs. No South American market stalls, pottery, weapon stacks, textiles, statues, or other artifacts to represent the handiwork and non-architectural material culture of these civilizations. Now let's consider regional flavor and balance. First off is everyone's favorite unit, the Champi. I do really like the Champi as a replacement for the militia line, and in an older video, I championed the replacement of champions, so I'm glad we have the Champi in that role so that rather than fighting each other with swords, South American civilizations can have a Champi off to see who's the champion of getting their Champi on. However, I'm less convinced about it also replacing the Eagle, which seems like trying to do too much, as the Eagle was already a compromise to approximate the variety of roles filled by Old World light and heavy cavalry units. The early game Champi balance was one of the main problems with the release of this DLC, and is still very much unresolved several months out. Rather than combining units, having two new unit lines, a heavy infantryman to replace militia line and a weaker trash scout infantry, would have given them a lot more flexibility, and perhaps precluded the need for two of the three new civilizations to have unique barracks units, while also giving them a goldless raiding unit in late game. As suggested and predicted, Slingers became a regional unit, although I have mixed thoughts about them being chosen as the trash unit. The prior concept of Slingers as a more specialized New World alternative to hand cannoneers gave them a very solid role, and made a lot of historical sense, as slings were by far one of the most effective weapons faced by Europeans in the New World, and were even sometimes compared to firearms. In theory, it's good for South American civs to have another trash unit in late game, but in practice I don't know that it's that useful, as other civs have no reason to make spearline against American civilizations, and all three South American trash units take bonus damage from skirmishers. By contrast, a trash infantry unit for raiding would have had a much more distinguished role in this situation. The Slinger itself doesn't quite seem to stand on its own feet, as each civilization needs one or more powerful bonuses or technologies for them, and in my ongoing mods for other South American civilizations, it's obvious that in each design I have to allocate a bonus or technology towards slingers to make them reasonably useful. Generic slingers can't quite swing it. The settlement is okay. Thematically, it's not overwhelmingly South American, as literally everyone built settlements, and while the decentralized communal storehouse or state warehouse aspect is a bit more compelling, could also apply to many other civilizations. I continue to think that it should have a South American name, unless they plan on giving it to other civilizations. I will at least credit it with getting rid of the Dark Age donkey in the mill. As far as building replacements, I was hoping for a tribal fort or village as a weaker but cheaper castle substitute, as apart from the Huns and Cumans, the new civilizations are basically a who's who of people who didn't use stone to build anything vaguely approximate to castles. Perhaps that goes too far, but at very least the new civilization should not have had stone walls. The irony is that the campaigns actually include a new wooden fort building, but only to represent the European presence, and large palisades, which along with the existing fortified palisades would have been an amazing and appropriate alternative to stone walls, or upgrade to existing palisades for the new civilizations. On that note, the historical dimension of the DLC is a mixed bag as usual. We may take a deeper look at this in future videos, but my critique is that the official civilization designers consistently take a far more casual and flippant approach to history than is needed or justified by gameplay alone, and that this DLC in particular called for much more rigor. We all know that the game never had amazing historical fidelity, but many things are historically bonkers for no particularly good reason, and far beyond what is necessary for balance and enjoyable civilization design. Obviously not the worst thing in the world, but it results in a lot of accumulated weirdness over time, and many missed opportunities for the civs to feel authentic as what they supposedly represent. Among the 2P, examples of things I find entirely unnecessary are their access to stone walls, having all relevant armor technologies while being historically the least armored civilization in the game, and having some of the hardest hitting stone fortifications, being among the least appropriate possible civilizations for having powerful castles and keeps. I'm not going to ding them for blacksmiths or mining technologies where historically they had neither mining nor metallurgy, as those are absolutely critical for gameplay. But even most of their bonuses don't seem like strong references to anything particularly unique or interesting about the 2P, including their caciques technology, which comes from a Taino word for chiefs, even though some 2P terms were available. and benefits their Inca-style champies and slingers, which the 2P didn't really use. If you're going to do all the silly things you need to make a 2P civ work in AoE2, you might as well go all out and manifest some anthropophagy. Even a bonus to represent Brazilwood would be to die for. As it is, the civ design reflects a minimal interest in history after the couple boxes were checked off for their unique units and use of poison. Granted, making them playable as well as historically sensible is no trivial task. As others have said, the 2P are generally the poorest existing match for AoE2's technology tree, and even the concept of them advancing through the ages is pretty historically bonkers when you think about it. I do prefer to think of them as a stand-in for more advanced and organized Amazonian civilizations that we sadly know very little about. But even so, and given all the other gameplay compromises made for their sake, I really think their technological limitations needed to have been more prominent in the civ design. I will give some partial credit on the basis that they do miss several more technologies than the Inca, have tolerably historical unique units, and are at least mechanically functional while having one of the simpler designs of recent civilizations. The Muiscas labor under some of the same difficulties, but are generally more historically sensible. At least they had some notable metallurgy, more robust political organization, their monk and economic focus is broadly on point, the Guecha exists, and the slinger bonus is more justifiable. The archer focus, like their bows, is a bit of a stretch, as the Muisca Confederation specifically did not emphasize archery, although it made limited use of bows from captured enemies. The armor bonus is also strange, as while the Muiscas were better clothed than the 2P, they were not well armored to the standards of Mesoamerica or the Central Andes. Temple guards are a little complicated, as at least the masks are based on real artifacts, and the units are somewhat inspired by shamans that kept certain shrines. Although my understanding from historical sources is that they were likely non-combatant priests, advisors, and caretakers, rather than armed guards with any documented or plausible military role. So there's something to it, but it has a questionable interpretation as a tanky paladin slayer with a Central Andean prestige weapon that I've seen no evidence for among the Muisca, and which would have been quite fragile if made of tumbaga as in the official DLC lore. Conceptually, it is a cool unit, it just doesn't feel grounded in the actual strengths of the Muisca the way a unique unit should be, so it makes a lot more sense to me as a broader Andean regional unit. The Mapuches have some similar technological limitations to the 2P, but at least their civilization strengths are actually pretty well done, as far as most of them being easily identifiable with actual history, obviously including a hefty assist from captured Spanish technology. The only thing I find deeply silly is the Malon technology, for several reasons we may consider another time. The biggest general critique I have about the Mapuche civ is that it feels inflationary. For example, with a straight-up much better version of the Frank's Berry bonus, and generally pretty loaded with a lot of powerful bonuses and effects. For example, with the pass-through damage provided by Malon alone having the potential to be a civilization-defining skirmisher ability, like the Mesoamerican Atlatl-Tex. But unlike those technologies also affecting other units, and not even being their only powerful bonus for skirmishers. Even so, this DLC is more restrained than the Three Kingdoms with all its gimmicks, and at least in terms of timeline and demographics, the civilizations generally feel more true to the identity of the game than the 3K factions. One other strong point in favor of appropriate flavor is that these civilizations do all have unique voice lines, with the proper languages as far as I can tell. This doesn't cancel out the bonkerisms, but it does show high effort at least in that department, and improves the unique feel of these civilizations. Overall, I give this DLC a respectable B-. It's at least generally high effort enough that I consider it broadly good, and even one of the better non-Chronicles DLCs in a while, with the effort put into visuals and voice lines being a massive highlight, and something I want to continue to encourage. And I do think it deserves a better rating than is shown in the current Steam reviews. Many of the negative comments take issue with the campaign design or AI behavior and current balance, which are all hopefully temporary issues, but are understandable complaints. And more pre-release testing would be a good investment to not drive away the people you're trying to attract with a new DLC. Just hire Phosphor to find all the crazy exploits before you release something into the wild, and try to build an AI ally that doesn't put the bot in lobotomized. Despite a lot of promise, the DLC does fall short of greatness in a few ways. Regional units seem like a work in progress, and I'm not sure that the combine everything philosophy for both the settlement and the champi was ideal as a design decision. Despite the squishing together of roles, the DLC civilizations actually have more unit lines available than Mesoamerican civs, and on average, significantly more civ bonuses and effects from their unique technologies, yet don't seem much more flexible in terms of their viable options. The civilization design of the Muiscas especially is a bit too weak overall, and the role of the Guecha warrior too niche. The mediocre historical inspiration of the civs overall is unfortunate in any DLC, but it's particularly jarring when it comes to lower tech civilizations that already need previously unheard of levels of accommodation. The takeaway is that the DLC and update did reach excellence in the aesthetics department, and did some interesting things with gameplay for the new civilizations, while filling in some major blank spaces in South America. However, it did so in a limited way as far as timeline and technology, ignoring most of the classic medieval high cultures and, well, forgotten empires that some of us expected. Going forward, I'd like to see a similar level of investment in assets, including architecture, but with a bit more effort put into historical rigor and realism. And as far as civilization choice, I'd prefer a more balanced emphasis on powerful, centralized medieval civilizations that were prominent in more of the core timeframe, rather than so many new civs feeling like edge cases in terms of timeline, technology, organization, or all three. Once again, not balancing out the largely tribal emphasis of this DLC with at least one of the major medieval South American empires or states seems like a significant mistake. While there's no formal list of requirements for a civilization, the original developers were trying to convey something very important about the game's vision with its twin titles, Age of Empires and Age of Kings. So those are my thoughts on the DLC and update. Let me know what you think. That's all for today, and thanks for watching. This has been me, candidly, but not cantankerously, critiquing the conceptual coherence of chieftain civilizations, and complimenting the comeliness of the charming constructions. Till next time.